kjære Kjell Magne. Good morning, everyone. My name is Amir Javed Sheikh, and I am the head of the foundation Dialogue for Peace. We work for peace, bridge building, and dialogue between countries and conflict areas. On this occasion, an urgent ceasefire is needed between Gaza and Israel. A total of at least 212 Palestinians have lost their lives in a recent week, around 61 of them children. On the Israeli side, 10 people have been killed, including 2 children. To prevent the loss of more civilians' life and to prevent further escalation of conflicts in Israel and the Palestinian areas, we call for an urgent ceasefire. It's my pleasure to welcome all the participants, which will shed light on how to bring peaceful solution between Palestine and Israel. I'm pleased to give the floor to Mr. Kjell Magne Bondevik, Norway's former Prime Minister and current chair of the Oslo Center, working for peace, democracy, and human rights, to introduce speakers and lead the program further. This dialogue meeting will be broadcast live also in social media. Welcome to you all, and I will give the floor to Mr. Kjell Magne Bondevik, former Prime Minister, to moderate this program further.
Your Excellencies, dear friends, once again we experience the tragic days in the Israeli-Palestinian relations. Many also innocent civilians and children are suffering and killed. Buildings and other infrastructure is destroyed. Families have to leave their homes, and the number of IDPs, displaced people and refugees, is increasing. It is really a humanitarian crisis. We all agree that this must come to an end as soon as possible. The questions are how and why is this happening again? We were told that a starting point this time was a conflict about a house in Jerusalem, if it should be the home for a Palestinian or a Jewish family. Hamas and Islamic Jihad know that when they start sending rockets into Israel, Israel will react by bombing in Gaza. The spiral of violence is well known. It must be broken by a ceasefire. The international community has called for a ceasefire. The UN Security Council is striving to reach a consensus. News say that Egypt is trying to influence the Palestinian organizations responsible in Gaza. And we know that US is a key to convince Israel how and when to implement the ceasefire. A ceasefire is urgent of humanitarian reasons, but we all know that we need a political solution on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in order to avoid new violent conflicts and humanitarian crisis. For more than 70 years after the international recognized establishment of the State of Israel, it has been impossible to reach a peaceful, sustainable, and negotiated solution. Should we give up and accept that violence and wars will come back and come back? The last days should convince us that this is not a real alternative. The international community, and first of all, the parties themselves, must give new energy to establish talks and later negotiations. The conditions for this is not good for the time being, because we know that the Palestinians are split between Hamas and Fatah, that are ruling Gaza and the West Bank. The Israeli government does not seem so interested and have a complicated internal political situation. The solutions look simple and at the same time complicated. Most people agree that we need two states, borders from 1967 with adjustments, Jerusalem in one or another way to be capital for both states. The Oslo Accords were not a solution, but a roadmap to address and negotiate the key issues, the root causes for the conflict. The situation now is different. The process must, in one or another way, include all relevant groups. Others will be the decision makers. But I look forward to listen to all of you present today who have insight and information and some influence in the current situation. I hope for a friendly, dialogue-oriented conversation today. First, we will listen to the Israeli and the Palestinian ambassadors to Oslo. Thereafter, two from the international community and the Muslim world. And finally, we go back to the region and we listen to two of you who are living in Bethlehem and in Jerusalem in the conflict-ridden areas. I ask all of you to be on time, maximum 10 minutes for your intervention, and I will be strict on that as a moderator. And maybe I have also to interrupt, which I don't like to do, to be on time and to save some minutes for questions and dialogue after the intervention. And I will moderate this session. And first of all, then I give the floor to the Israeli ambassador to Norway, His Excellency Alan Roth. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister Bondevik, and thank you, Mr. Amir Sheikh, for the opportunity to speak here. And you have a very esteemed group of speakers here, and I really thank you for this occasion. Do we want to create new environment in the Middle East? Do we want to look forward? Do we want to accept the other? Do we want to reconcile? Do we want to argue, but around the table? Do we want people-to-people connections? Do we want a dialogue? The title of this discussion. Or do we want the past to dominate us? We want to throw annihilation threats. We want to continue the hatred. We want to take decision on battlefields. Because these are the fundamental questions in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in the end. These are the issues that will determine whether we will be able to dialogue and to solve the conflict or conflicts. And the present conflict in Gaza is a testimony of this. Hamas in Gaza is an entity that is unable to accept the other, an entity that is engraving in its charter, in its internal Bible, the annihilation of the other, annihilation of the state of Israel. An entity whose all existence is not achieving positive outcomes to the Gaza population, but by the annihilation of the other, an entity that sanctified death over life. Yesterday, Israel enabled the passage of dozens of trucks with humanitarian supplies to Gaza while our cities were still bombed. But because we do not have war with the population and we wanted to ease a bit their suffering, we enabled this convoy. But Hamas, their own ruler, bombed the area of the convoy, killing 2 civilians and injured many. Hamas bombed who were trying to facilitate that convoy passage for the people of Gaza themselves. We Israelis have more empathy and compassion to the citizens of Gaza than Hamas then rules them. In our views, he rules them in order to use them as human shields. Buddha used to say, work out on your own salvation. Do not depend on the others. Hamas is not defining itself by positive agenda for Gaza or the Palestinians as a whole, only through the demonic hatred of Israel. There was an Israeli dream concerning Gaza. Shimon Peres said that Gaza can become the Middle Eastern Singapore, a Palestinian entity, prosperous, open, Palestinians working with Israelis, industrial zones on the border, in which technology, money, manpower from both sides will be creating mutual wealth, creating dialogues. Part of the new Middle East of creation, of looking forward, of accepting the other, of reconciliation, but not for Hamas. This was not their vision, no dialogue, externally or eternally. I will remind you that the hundreds that Hamas killed when it seized power in Gaza were Palestinians, their brothers. Some were thrown from tall buildings, some were just shot or disappeared, so not even dialogue within their own camp. Yes, by the same organizationate people that cry out to you today. They began with their relatives and continued with minorities, religious minorities, LGBTs, political opponents, PLO members and leaders, and the list is very long. These are the values of this organization that some people support nowadays. And they had religious claims, especially concerning the holy city of Jerusalem and Al-Aqsa, the Temple Mount. But when it suited them a few days ago, they shot and launched rockets on this same Jerusalem, on the third most holy city for Islam and the first and foremost holy city for Christians and Jews. And this is the organization that some people support. And they don't even talk about settlements or land swaps or what's the best way to resolve the issues of Jerusalem or refugees or dialogues. Not because they forgot, because they negate, they oppose the heart of the matter on which my superiors in Jerusalem and the superiors of the Palestinian ambassador here and many top Norwegian diplomats were dealing with many years ago, trying to achieve and invent solutions, trying to find this elusive way to peace. Hamas has no intention to reach peace. Hamas wants total annihilation and destruction of Israel. Hamas carried out long, violent suicide bomb campaign 20 years ago when seeds of peace and dialogue began to pop up between Israelis and Palestinians. Hamas killed Israelis, Palestinians, and the chance for something better for those people, and Hamas killed the dialogues that we had. And this is the organization that is being hailed by some people. Hamas is the emblem of why the question of dialogue and peaceful reconciliation between the two peoples has a huge question mark on it. Hamas is the reason and the explanation why we are immersed time and again with violence. There is a list of what people call the core issues. I'm not cynical here, but are they really the core issues? I don't know, and I have no mandate here to deal with them and to discuss and to have a debate on this. But for the time being, they are dwarfed, in my view, by the question, are you accepting Israel at all? Are they really real core issues or excuses in order to not having a dialogue with Israel? The core issue today, in my view, is whether entities like Hamas that are calling for annihilation, destruction, non-reconciliation policies are going to rule our landscape. If this is the case, then just like ISIS, there is no way forward. And the last 10 days pose a very important lesson to the whole world and to us Israelis. How a democracy is trying to de-escalate a very tense situation, canceling a parade in Jerusalem, not allowing Jews to walk on Temple Mount. A Supreme Court is trying to defuse a country that already was bombed by 17,000 rockets, is not retaliating for the first rockets that are being sent by Hamas even before Jerusalem. And to all these de-escalation efforts, Hamas has one answer, and this is launching rockets on Jerusalem. How a terror organization is aiming at annihilating a state and taking by force another people, their brothers, exactly as they did 14 years ago. How a terror organization is committing a double war crime by deliberately shooting from cities that harbor millions of civilian population on all the Israeli cities, not army bases. And how this terror organization launched these rockets from its own civilian population, and when even 25% of their own missiles fall on this population, like in Bet Hanun, a Palestinian neighborhood in Gaza, in which it killed on the first day a whole family, including children. Of course, Hamas blamed Israel immediately, and there were no journalists to contradict it, because I remind you that in Gaza, there is no really free press or reporting from Hamas-ruled city. We have to learn how a terror organization is planting its rockets, mortars, command and control center in the middle of civilian population, taking them as human shields. My heart breaks as a father, as a grandfather, when I see wounded or killed children, Palestinians and Israelis, Israelis and Palestinians. We do so much in order to make sure it won't happen. No other army in the world is taking the measures that we take. But Hamas doesn't care about the Israeli children he is killing. And by the way, the numbers are much higher than the ones that were stated before. Not even the Palestinian children that are being killed are important in the eyes of the Hamas that killed many of them. This is a partner for dialogue. This is an organization that used billions of dollars. Some of them is the money of the countries that are represented here, not in order to build hospitals and schools and universities to teach innovation, but in order to build rockets, in order to build armament, in order to build tunnels. By the way, tunnels in which its leaders are hiding while they leave the population outside as human shields and launch rockets from their side. If we will let such an organization to get stronger, if you will continue to equate such a law-abiding, democratic free society to a deadly and cruel terror organization, you condemn the citizens of Gaza to more suffering, you condemn the Palestinian people for more suffering, and we Israelis are not going to benefit from it. I am sure that no dialogue will come out of it. Israel is a country full of innovation. We do not want just better engineering. We do innovation. And now we do peace innovation, not alone. We signed 4 peace agreements lately in the last year for our sake, and our partners signed it for their sake, exactly as Buddha said, each one for himself. But the future will be mutual, and it's going to be a positive future for all of us. And we have mutual projects and people-to-people projects, a dialogue that is not just words, but real actions, real interaction. We want to see prosperous Palestinians around us. We want to see Palestinians embedded in this
About the
problem.
time.
We want together, I have 1 minute and I'm finishing. We want to work together, not just for peace, but for agriculture, innovation, and the whole list. This is the real dialogue. And
Yeah.
we do not forget the problems, the challenges, the needs, and yes, the core issues. But we chose a different path, a path of dialogue, of cooperation, to complement each other, to contribute to each other. We hope that the Palestinians will look not with a microscope towards an issue and highlight it, but with a telescope towards the future, as we are trying to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Time was running out. And now I leave it over to Her Excellency, Madame Marie-Antoinette Sedin, the Ambassador of Palestine to Norway. And I also ask you to be strict on time, maximum 10 minutes. You must unmute. Your Excellency, you must, you are muted. You must unmute.
Is it
okay? Now,
is it
now
okay?
it's okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Bondevik. Honorable speakers, dear participants. Excuse me to start by saying that I feel so sad, sick, and disappointed. What I heard, I felt like we are not the victims, we are the occupier. But this is not the reality. Well, thank you, Mr. Amir, for arranging this webinar to give us the opportunity to highlight the situation in Palestine. Today, 73 years of occupation, and we're still hoping for the international community to react, to fulfill their obligations towards my Palestinian people. But unfortunately, they react with statements of condemnation, which have always been ignored by Israel. Let's not forget that the Nakba took place in 1948 and has been a continuous process of killing, imprisoning, displacement, demolishing home, confiscating land, seizure all its natural resources, committing massacres and mass atrocities. The violation against the Palestinians is going on and on, day in, day out, year in and year out for 73 years. Do you think, isn't the right time to act? The recent situation didn't start 10 days ago. One, Gaza reacts in supporting our people's resistance against the Israeli aggression in Jerusalem and other cities in the occupied Palestinian territories. It started in the beginning of May when the Israeli forces attacked religious rituals at the Sepulchre Church in Jerusalem. Weeks later, the Israeli forces provoked and attacked the peaceful prayers in Al-Aqsa Mosque. during the last week of Ramadan, with tear gas and live bullets, injured hundreds. We cannot forget the ongoing issues of confiscating the Palestinian land piece for piece and destroying the Palestinian homes, uprooting the olive trees, forcing Palestinians to leave their properties, and demolishing their homes in Jerusalem and its surrounding. And in specific, the region of Sheikh Jarrah. Let's not forget that. When the Israeli settlers, backed by Israeli forces, assaulted 28 families to evict their homes because these homes belonged to Israeli settlers by the decision made by Israeli court. Those families who live in Sheikh Jarrah were forced to leave their homes in Haifa and Jaffa in 1948. And now they have to evict their homes again and be displaced. This is not the only area in Palestine that Israel forced Palestinians to evict their homes or been forced to demolish their homes under the pretext of not being licensed by the Israeli authorities. Many statements came out condemning the Israeli behavior, criticizing the aggressive daily attacks by the settlers on the Palestinian people, asking Israel to stop the annexation, expanding the building of settlements, demolishing and the homes of the Palestinian, and building new settlements on the annexed land. Israel ignoring all these statements, and not a single word or any statement mentioned that the Palestinians have the right to self-defense. Even though you blame the Palestinian people resisting the occupying forces who are attacking the worshippers and working to displace more Palestinians from their homes in Jerusalem. We are not the reason of escalation of the recent situation. We are defending our existence. Allow me, dear participants, to underline the suffering of the Gaza people. Israel launched wars on Gaza. We can remember the war in 2008-2009, the war on 2012, the war on 2014 that caused more than 10,000 injured and 2,300 deaths, including 3,300 children, of whom 1,000 were left permanently disabled. Gaza, the most densely populated city in the world, and the biggest open-air prison with 2 million people, has no place to go. They got messages to leave their homes before the strikes and the attacks, but where to go? 15 years and Gaza was under blockade and siege. How can Gaza be a Singapore when you don't have a outgoing, or outport, or gateways out? These wars, of course, destroyed many residential buildings, damaged the infrastructure, destroying and damaged schools, homes, water supplies, and hospitals, making all the people in Gaza live under miserable and severe humanitarian conditions. Now, and for the 9th or 10th consecutive day, the Israeli occupation forces continues its military aggression against the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip, caused until yesterday 213 deaths of whom 61 children, injured more than 1,400, mainly women and children. And this war is still going on. Many years of suffering is unbearable. We live under aggressive daily attacks by the settlers, by the Israeli forces, dehumanizing all the people who passing the checkpoints, building a wall that separates families and separate even homes. They cut the homes in the middle. So the valiant struggle and resistance of Palestinian people, which extends over Palestinian historic land in Jerusalem, West Bank, and Gaza, and within the occupied territories in 1948, confirms again and again that the unity of the Palestinian living under apartheid regime and that the Palestinian adherence to the national identity that the occupation has failed to erase.
Your Excellency, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have to remind you about the time because your time is running out now. Can you conclude?
Just seconds. Despite the 73 years of occupation, which is the core issue of the conflict. So to reach a dialogue, people to people, and to have the right to live and exist, we have to end the occupation. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador. I have to be strict on time. So now we have heard the views from the two main parties, the Israelis and the Palestinians, that we also know from before. Now I think we should have a look from a more outside world and see how they can contribute in this regard. And the first speaker is a former Prime Minister, Mr. Zaid Yusuf Raza Gilani from Pakistan, who is now the opposition leader in the upper house of the parliament of Pakistan, an old friend of mine. So I give you now the floor, and I ask you also to be strict, maximum 10 minutes.
Thank you. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Good morning. Mr. Kjell Magne Bondevik, former Prime Minister of Norway, Mr. Ahmed Javed Sheikh, President, Foundation Dialogue for Peace, Dr. Muhammad bin Abdul Karim Al Isa, Secretary General of Muslim World League, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am extremely grateful to be invited to share my perspective on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, a long-standing Middle East dispute which has caused large-scale loss of lives and destruction, generated tension in the Middle East, polarized communities, and stifled economic growth. Events over the last few days have resulted in the loss of hundreds of innocent Palestinian lives, including children, and left even more innocent civilians injured. The violence has underscored the urgency of a peaceful resolution to this dispute in accordance with the international law and the aspirations of the people. Attacks on innocent worshippers in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, one of the holiest sites of Muslims across globe during the sacred month of Ramadan, is against all norms of humanity and human rights law. Such atrocities on the worshippers are not only condemnable but are not acceptable by any religion. This senseless cycle of bloodshed, terror, and destruction must stop immediately. We need to understand that these brutal acts clash with the UN definition of self-defense and resultantly turned the conflict into a massacre. The ongoing confrontation, which has the potential to create instability for the entire region, was waiting to happen. The latest conflict comes after years of ignoring the legitimate aspirations of the people of Palestine, failing to implement UN Security Council's resolutions, and breaking past promises and commitments. These failures have generated widespread frustration and anger, creating a precarious situation manifesting in violence and bloodshed. The risk of a major war with catastrophic consequences for Palestinians, Israelis, and the Middle East has now dramatically increased. Faced with a similar situation in our region in the shape of Jammu and Kashmir dispute, there are certain lessons to be learned because that is for the last 74 years and Palestinians issue is for the last 73 years. Number one, we should have no doubt that violence, repression of wars are counterproductive. They do not resolve issues. The Indian security forces have resorted to repression and violence in Indian occupied Kashmir, which practically remains under lockdown for the last 74 years. But they have not been able to suppress the Kashmiri sentiment. Pakistan and India have resorted to wars in the past and low intensity conflicts, but are realizing that wars is not a viable option. Pakistan firmly believes that the only way to resolve dispute is pursue a meaningful dialogue, discussing all substantive issues in accordance with the international laws and the aspiration of the people of disputed territory. Two, another lesson that we have learned, and I'm sure the Israelis and the Palestinians too would have learned, is that managing conflicts or ignoring substantive issues only brings about temporary relief. For the lasting peace, disputes must be resolved through a principle of give and take, while adhering to the past commitments and promises. Number three, yet another lesson that we can draw from the Pakistan-India conflict is injustice perpetrated by the mighty will never be accepted by the weaker side. Illegal occupation of lands and building settlements on occupied or disputed land is not allowed under international law. Injustice breeds tendencies to take revenge by a weaker side whenever it gets a chance to do so. For with little hope of a better future and faced with the trauma of being stateless, many young Palestinians will be compelled to take up militancy. According to a recent survey, the notion of confronting Israel with guns and gaining currency amongst the younger generation of Palestinians. 5. In the last couple of months, several Middle Eastern countries have reoriented their policies towards Israel, culminating in a peaceful accord known as Abraham Accord. Such overtures were being made by the Middle Eastern countries in the hope that it may persuade Israel to abide by the relevant Security Council's resolutions and end its settlement on the occupied lands. The latest conflict will only act as a setback to this process. Accordingly, it is incumbent on the entire international community to prevent the situation from deteriorating further. There is no solution in war, bloodshed, or violence. Only a peaceful and meaningful dialogue will bring about lasting peace. For this purpose, there are certain imperatives which must be followed. Number one, strong political will, and the ability to take bold decisions by the top Israeli leadership to de-escalate violence and pursue the dialogue is of a paramount importance. Two, the international community must reiterate its commitment towards a two-state solution in accordance with the relevant on UN Security Council's resolutions with the pre-1967 borders, Al-Quds al-Sharif as the capital of a viable independent Palestine state. Three, Western and regional countries, it is very important, should play a constructive role towards a peace process by encouraging the two sides to come to the negotiating table. A neutral role would be critical to the success of the process. There are rational voices on both the Palestinian and Israeli sides who must be co-opted in the peace process. Number four, illegal settlements on occupied lands must be halted. Fifth, finally, the media can play a constructive role in both highlighting human rights abuses and creating the space for saner voices to work towards peace and conflict resolution. Ladies and gentlemen, I pray that as the world looks to recover from an unprecedented global pandemic, we continue the important work of resolving long-standing disputes and building a brighter future for those who have seen conflict and violence for far too long. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you, my friend, Prime Minister Gilani. We come back to you as to the others after we have the finished list of speakers. And now I will turn over to another good friend, Secretary General Mohammed Al-Issa, Secretary General of the Muslim World League and the former Minister of Justice in Saudi Arabia, and engaged for peace and reconciliation all over the world. I give you the floor, please.
السيد كاجيل ماجني بونديفيك رئيس وزراء النرويج الأسبق، معالي السيد الراباي ميخائيل ميلكيور، معالي السيد أمير جاويد رئيس مؤسسة الحوار من أجل السلام، السيدات والسادة، الحضور الكريم، أحييكم تحية طيبة، ويسرني أن أتحدث إليكم بخصوص قضية مهمة سبق أن أصدرنا فيها عدة بيانات أوضحنا فيها موقفنا الصريح والواضح. إنه لمن المؤسف حقا أن يحصل هذا التداعي المؤلم لهذه القضية من خلال مواجهات لا تخدم السلام وتعيد الأمور إلى الوراء. إن الحالة الدامية لهذه القضية والتي تألم منها كل ضمير حي لن تنتهي إلا بوجود إرادة صادقة لإنهائها من خلال حل عادل وشامل. ونحن عبر مؤسساتنا التي نرأسها في رابطة العالم الإسلامي وفي هيئة علماء المسلمين وفي المنتدى العالمي للتواصل الحضاري وفي مركز القيادة المسؤولة وفي رابطة جامعات الدول الإسلامية، نؤكد كما أكدنا سابقا ومرارا على أن مبادرة السلام العربية هي الحل الأمثل لهذه القضية، مع وجوب احترام القرارات الدولية ذات الصلة والتنديد بكل الممارسات الدامية أيا كانت ذرائعها. لقد تعلمنا من عظة التاريخ بأن منطق القوة يعتبر منطقا خاسرا في جميع الأحوال وإن طال به الزمن، كما أن منطق العدالة لا يمكن أن يقبل بأنصاف الحلول، ومنطق الحكمة لا يقبل أيضا بتعليق هذه القضية المحورية والتهرب من حوارها الفعال، وذلك من خلال صرف الانتباه عن الحق والمنطق الذي يجب أن ينهي تاريخها المليء بالآلام والتداعيات والمآسي. القضية الفلسطينية هي ملك أصحابها وهم أصحاب القرار فيها، وقد قدمت الدول العربية تلك المبادرة وحظيت بقبول الحكماء في الداخل الفلسطيني، حيث رحبوا بمنطقها العادل الذي يضع الأمور في نصابها الصحيح من خلال إيجاد حل يحفظ كافة الحقوق وينظر للقضية بنظرة فاحصة من كل جانب. إن الوضع الراهن مؤلم للغاية ولا ندري ما هي عواقبه، ويجب أن يتوقف فورا، وعلى الجميع أن يعود لطاولة المفاوضات والحوار لتحقيق العدالة الشاملة لهذه القضية. نعم، هناك من هو مستفيد من المماطلة في إيجاد حل عادل وشامل لها، سواء على مستوى مصالحه السياسية أو المادية أو غيرها، لكن السؤال يقول من يدفع الثمن؟ يجب على الفور إيقاف هذه التداعيات المؤلمة، سواء فيما يخص انتهاك حرمة الأماكن المقدسة أو النزيف الدامي لإطلاق النار. كما يجب استئناف المفاوضات سعيا لحل هذه القضية على أساس حل الدولتين، مع الرفض التام لأي خطوات تؤدي إلى تقويض الأمن والسلام في المنطقة. إن الاستمرار في هذا النزيف المقلق للغاية لن تنفع فيه الذرائع التي لا تزيد الأمور إلا مكابرة وتعقيدا وعودة مؤسفة للوراء، والخاسر في هذا هو الجميع. كما يجب على الجميع أيضا أن ينظروا من كافة الزوايا وليس من زاوية واحدة كما أشرنا إلى ذلك سابقا، وعليهم كذلك أن يجعلوا المنطق العادل والشامل هو أداة الحسم في هذه القضية. وفي الختام نؤكد مناشدتنا مجددا للمجتمع الدولي بالتدخل السريع لإنهاء الوضع المأساوي الحالي، ودعوة الجميع للحوار من أجل صالح الجميع. أكرر سعادتي بمشاركتكم في هذا المؤتمر، والسلام عليكم.
Many thanks to Secretary General Al-Issa for his statement and for the principles that he drew up for a possible peaceful solution. And then we go back to the region that is affected by this violent conflict. And I will introduce my friend, Chief Rabbi Michael Melchior from Jerusalem. He has been working also in Oslo, Norway, as a rabbi and now chief rabbi. He has been a member of parliament and of government in Israel, and he is working still continuously for reconciliation and peace between the parties in this conflict. So I now give the floor to you, Michael.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the organizers, Amir Sheikh. Thank you, Sheikh Magne. Thank you very much to my dear friend, His Excellency, Sheikh Dr. Muhammad Al-Issa, and to the other participants, Your Excellencies, ambassadors. It's easy to fall in the pit hole of the blame game. Who is most to blame? Who did this first? Who did that first? And how do we place the blame? And we never get out of that blame game because there's plenty of blame to go around. I dealt in polemics when I was young, back in 40 years ago, and I saw that nothing good came out of it. nothing grew, nothing was produced. And also now I put my notes aside and I decided just to speak to you from the heart, because what's spoken from the heart, what is poured out from the heart, I hope will enter the hearts of my colleagues here. I really speak to you from a bleeding heart. For the last 11 days, I have not been able to sleep more than maybe 1 hour per night, working day and night and speaking to all the sides as the head of what is called the Religious Peace Initiative in the Middle East, together with my Palestinian Muslim partners. I must confess to you that we feel that we have failed, because in previous rounds we succeeded in avoiding the bloodshed, and because of agreements we had as insider mediators, we could avoid the bloodshed, and this time we didn't succeed, and we feel we've failed, and we feel also the blood on our hands. We feel responsible, and this is a terrible feeling, although again, working day and night to avoid this, it's out of our hands. And this is a terrible feeling. Also personally, I have to share with you, I have children now on the front as parts of the Israeli Defense Force. I have grandchildren now, parts of the Israeli Defense Force. We have partners in Gaza whose center have been working for years with them as our partners for dialogue and peace. The center is now in ruins, destroyed totally, as we have friends in the Israeli city of Akko who have a big center for dialogue and peace, and that is also gone up in fire by Arab mobs who put it up in fire. And we feel that while all this is going up in fire and nothing can grow, how can we continue after this? And I must share with you these feelings, because the heart is up here. We want everybody to come back peacefully. And we know that people are bleeding and going to funerals, and it's difficult to see how you can come out of this peacefully. And if we only look back and who is to be faulted, and I must tell you, Ambassador from Palestine to Norway, I'm sad when you talk about 73 years of occupation, because when I talk to your Rais, he doesn't talk about that. He talks about 54 years of occupation. If you talk about 73 years of occupation, then you really say that there is no place for Israel. There's no place for two peoples, for two states, for two peoples, for the peace which we're striving towards. And Rais Abu Mazen says that it was a cardinal mistake in 1947 that the Arabs did not accept the division plan for Palestine. But we had lots of mistakes. I understand the Nakba. I understand the feelings. All of it is understood. And the problem is that we have two narratives. Also, our children, our youngsters, they're sitting with two narratives. They see on the social media, they only see their own pain. They get in every half minute. They don't watch television. They don't read newspapers. They only get in on their social media every half minute, new things, new atrocities done by the other side, and vice versa on the Palestinian side. I get in all of it. I get in from both sides. And again, the heart is bleeding. And we have to get out of this. And there's only one way of getting out of it. Like the head of opposition in Pakistan said, and like Sheikh Elisa said, it's by making peace. I believe that just as the source of this conflict was in religion, and it wasn't intentionally. I sat this morning in the headquarters of the police. I talked to leading police people on our side, and I said to them, Do you really know what you did when you went into Al-Aqsa and stopped the prayer, the holy prayer, what's called the prayer 20, and you stopped the prayer while this is when the Muslims are bowing down the 20 times after the most holy of the prayers, and in the last days, the last 10 days after the night of Al-Qadr. Do you really know what you did? And none of them had a clue, because we don't know each other. We live together in the city of Jerusalem. We have 40% of our city are Palestinian Muslims, and we don't have a clue of what ticks each other. And we were supposed to teach the leading police about what happens amongst the Muslims, and it was cut off by the corona. We never got to it. I said, do you know which cardinal sin you did according to the Quran when you did that? And just to understand this, and to understand then the reactions. Of course, it doesn't justify burning down synagogues, and doesn't justify. Nothing is a question of justifying or not justifying. It's just a question of understanding what we're doing, what we're talking about, and how do we get out of this. And just as religion can be used and as a means, what is going on the Temple Mount, Haram Sharif, is nuclear. It's nuclear. It's not just another place. This is nuclear, and it spreads all over the Muslim world, all over the Jewish world. And I think that the model that we have from our relationship with the Christian world, which was much more difficult than we've ever had with the Muslims, much, much more difficult. It's been a monologue of thousands of years. And today we have a much better relationship, thank God, with the Christian world. I think we can do the same with the Muslim world. I think we can make peace with Islam. And we've done immense progress over the last 10, 20 years, which people really don't know about. This is a revolution. One of the leaders of this revolution is Sheikh Mohammed Al-Issa, who has, with immense courage, broken down walls for this revolution. And some of us are small partners with him in this work. And it's happening all over the world, and we're not going to cease. And when I hear our partner in Gaza, whose center has been destroyed and is in ruins, and when I hear he says the day after, we're going to continue. We're not going to give up, and we're going to continue. When I hear this hope, and when I see the young rabbis and the young imams walking, patrolling the roads of Lod and Akko and Yafo, and they're patrolling together, and they're visiting each other in these days, difficult, impossible days, and they say, we're not going to give up hope. We're not going to give in to violence. We're going to take away the stumbling block for peace, and we're going to pave the way for the politicians to get their act together and do what they have to do, and to make peace, because there can't be new spirals. Shelmangna, you talked about the spirals of violence. We can't accept new rounds. We can't accept the rockets falling in over our borders. We can't accept that. But that can only be if there is the real deterrent.
Dear Michael, I have to interrupt now because the time is running out. We come back to you.
Sheikh Elisa gave me some of his minutes, so it's okay. Just one last.
Yeah, but you have to close now, so we come back.
One last sentence. We talk about deterrence. The real deterrence is if you have a real choice. And I think that what we need to do today is politically to create a real choice. Politically to create, also for the Hamas, to create for the all of the Palestinians together, the whole of the Arab world together, for Israel also, to create a real choice. We can choose two ways, for Israel, for Palestine, for everybody. We have a real choice. We can choose to go to the way of life. We can choose to go to the way of death. And I think that we have to lead the way. We as religious responsible, we as people of concern, We have to lead the way to present this choice for life or for death, for good or for bad. And then we can get out of this spiral of constant evil. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Michael, I will come back to some of the important issues that you addressed, and about the two narratives, which I think is a key here, and why the parties are blaming each other. So then we go to the last speaker now, who is the pastor, the Reverend Professor Dr. Mitri Raheb. He is founder and president of Dar al Kalima University College of Arts and Culture in Bethlehem, and many other positions, and he holds a doctorate in theology from the Philipps University at Marburg in Germany. So now we have a Christian voice among the Palestinians living in Bethlehem, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you, dear sisters and brothers. It's really an honor to be together with you today. Our rabbi started speaking from the heart, so I will do the same. I will start speaking from the heart, and then I will move a bit more to the brain. I started as a pastor in Bethlehem during the first Intifada. And for me at that time, dialogue was a very, very important component of my work. In fact, I was one of the founders of many initiatives of Christian-Jewish dialogue at that time. And I remember in 1989, we stood in Seoul, in South Korea, Israeli and Palestinian, Christians, Muslims, and Jews, and we made a covenant to make peace. And I remember 1 year later, we met in Hiroshima with another group of Israeli and Palestinians. And we saw the destruction that took place there, and we said no to war. This was a time of high hopes. It was the end of the apartheid regime. It was the fall of the Berlin Wall, and there was the Madrid Conference. 1993 was the Oslo Accord. The Norwegian really were able to broke a new path towards peace. And I remember together with Israeli and Palestinians, we met 1994 in Oslo when Arafat, Peres, and Rabin received the Nobel Peace Prize. That same year, I wrote a book, and in that book, I put my dream for peace, for a two-state solution, and my hope for a better future for everyone. We were hoping that we will get our state by the year 2000, when we were celebrating the Millennium Celebration, 2000 years of Christianity, that started in Palestine. But it was then actually that violence shattered the whole hope of that era. From 1997 to 2002, when Israel invaded our little town of Bethlehem, destroyed everything that we built for that Millennium Celebration. And it was a year after that Israel started building the wall around our city, Bethlehem. During these last 25 years, Jewish settlements were mushrooming, not only around Bethlehem, grabbing 84% of our land in Bethlehem, leaving only 16% to us, but throughout the West Bank, where really the West Bank was looking like a piece of a Swiss cheese, where Israel was getting the cheese and we Palestinians were pushed in the holes behind high walls. During the last 15 years, the situation was more or less calm in the West Bank. And yet, Israel did not do one move towards our president to proceed with peace. And this is why I think we need a new diagnosis. We need to ask why all of these efforts of people-to-people dialogue and so on did not succeed. There must be a reason. I think because our diagnosis was wrong, because this is not a conflict. It's not a conflict, what we have in Palestine between two parties. It's not a disagreement about land. It's not that we have two narratives. It's not that we argue about holy places. No, I think this paradigm is the wrong paradigm, because with this paradigm, we don't take the systemic oppression into account. It's really not that we have crazy Palestinians and crazy Israelis who cannot dialogue, who cannot come to terms with each other. There is a systemic oppression prevailing in Palestine. I learned this from our friends in the United States, the African American, their systemic oppression. I learned it in our friends in South Africa, the blacks there. They were living under apartheid. I learned it from our Native Americans in North America. They taught me to look at the systemic oppression that is the root cause of the issues. And so for me, if I look at what's happening in Palestine, the best description of it is settler colonialism. What do I mean with settler colonialism? The main feature that distinguishes settler colonialism from classical colonialism is the fact that settler colonialists come to permanently settle in an occupied land. They exercise state sovereignty and juridical control over the indigenous land while aiming to ultimately eliminate the native population. The indigenous people, Palestinians in this case, they become aliens at home, while the settlers coming from abroad, they cast themselves as the natives. To accomplish their plan, settler colonialists develop differing mechanisms, ideological constructs, and yes, in all cases, in South Africa, in Australia, in North America, they use the Bible actually to explain their settler colonialism. The indigenous land is described as empty or barren land that is just waiting to be discovered, thus becoming the private property of the settlers. The native people are depicted with racist construct as savage, uneducated, violent, dangerous, terrorists. And actually our ambassador, Israeli ambassador, demonstrated this morning exactly that demonization of the other. While the settlers portray themselves as the brave, civilized, and innovative people. Now, to defend the settler property, a police state is created and granted extraordinary power over the native people, including power over their civil affairs. In our case, actually, the settler colonialist, the settler movement in Israel, they want to grab the whole land without giving equal rights to the native people. Now, there is no way to do this but through an apartheid system that gives the colonizer all the rights with less or no rights to the colonized. The reports of B'Tselem and Human Rights Watch of the last months have shown clearly that today on both sides of the green line, there is already an apartheid system. I know my friends from Israel, they don't like to hear that, but looking in the mirror is really important for healing. What's happening in Sheikh Jarrah, and I was there last week, what's happening in Al-Aqsa Mosque are violent manifestations just of this settler colonial projects, because these settlers, they want to take all the homes, if they can, of Palestinians in Jerusalem. They want to take over Al-Aqsa Mosque and to have there the third temple. The root cause, dear sisters and brothers, is settler colonialism. Any dialogue that shies away from this reality will not help. And this is why I believe it's high time for a paradigm shift. For me, let me say that people of Jewish faith belong to the mosaic of Palestine, exactly as Christians and as Muslims. They belong as neighbors and or equal citizens. I know that there are many Jews who do not support the settler colonial projects. The Palestinians in Jerusalem, in the West Bank, Galilee, Gaza in the last days have demonstrated in very clear way that they will never accept a situation where Israelis are masters and Palestinians are slaves. We want to live in freedom on our land with human dignity on equal footing. I will end with this sentence. We support the Norwegian call for an urgent and immediate ceasefire. We need to end all bloodshed. But if we do not employ a paradigm shift, if we don't deal with the root causes, meaning settler colonialism, we will be in a much worse situation 5 years down the road. This is the challenge before us, Israeli, Palestinian, Norwegians. And Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers, not the peace talkers. Talking peace alone doesn't help. We need to be peacemakers and to end this settler colonial project. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And that was a good and blessed are the peacemakers, as we read in the Holy Scripture. And I think in all religions concerned here and present here today, we are peacemakers and we strive for peace. But I think I will return to Michael Melchior, because I think he focused very much on a key issue here. Of course, we have a reality that two people, Israelis and Palestinians, have their historical rights to live in the same area. And that is, of course, the real starting point of the conflict. So the question is how to make conditions to make this happen in a peaceful way, that the two people can live side by side peacefully. That is the challenge, of course. And I think, Michael, you pointed right when you said that we ask very often who to blame, but that is not a constructive way forward, because we know that there have been failures, as you said, on both sides, no doubt. And also in these days, there are failures on both sides. And the core problem here is that there are two narratives. And we have heard them also during this webinar now, two very different narratives. But we have to move forward from these two different narratives. And Michael, how do you think we can make conditions to change this situation, that parties are blaming each other, two very different narratives? How can they move forward on the same way towards a peaceful, lasting solution?
Well, first of all, I think we have to recognize a couple of things. Number two, that we're talking about not one indigenous people, but two indigenous people. We're both tied to the land. And it's not one, but it's two peoples, number one. Number two, as a believing Jew, I believe that, this is my personal belief, nobody else doesn't have to join that belief, but I believe that it's part of a divine plan that we are back in our old homeland. But I don't think it's a divine mistake then that there is another people living here. And therefore, I think that it's a divine challenge that we deal decently. Israel will not be free without also the Palestinians having their freedom. There will not be justice for Israel without there being justice for Palestine. So if those are the parameters, I think for how we go forward, then I think that we're a good step forward. Now, what is the main problem? The main problem, I think, is that the vast majority of the Israelis, 90% plus of the Israelis, 90% plus of the Palestinians, and the whole world want a solution, more or less, more plus minus, based on what Sheikh Elisa talked about, the Arab peace plan, maybe with some adjustment here and there, but more or less that is accepted more or less by the vast majority. Just the problem is that we are convinced that there's no partner on the other side. The other side is convinced that there's no partner on our side, so that we know where we have to go to, we know where we are, and we don't have a clue how to close down that gap. So we have to restore that belief, which also my predecessor here talked about, which was in 1993, where there was a hope. How do we restore that belief? Now, there we need courageous people to come out and to break down those walls, to come out and say, we are willing to talk about things which we did wrong, or to make gestures. Like, I must tell you, like, if those of you are old enough to remember or read in the history books, because you're all young, when President Sadat came to Jerusalem, when he was our biggest enemy. Okay, he was a Nazi supporter. He killed this, but he came here. He didn't give up on the Arab rights, and he said, no more war, no more violence. And he got what he wanted. He didn't give up on the Palestinian rights. He didn't give up in Egypt. He was dramatic. So what I believe is, we need this from the religious leadership to go out now strongly, from the world religious leadership to come out with strong gesture, so that we believe what has happened in the Muslim world, that the Israelis see that the Jewish world will come out and say very clearly, enough is enough. There is no religious war. It's not a religious war. We don't accept that. We don't want that. We can't trample on the Al-Aqsa Mosque. We can't do that. And if we see such important big gestures, I think that we can narrow down that gap, and then we can come to the political solution which is necessary for Gaza, for Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, and then we can solve the issue, because it's not that difficult to solve.
Thank you, Michael, for this constructive approach, how we can narrow the gap. And because that is the main issue now, if we should hope for a peaceful settlement. So then I will return.
The whole world thinks that it can stop dealing with our conflict, right? The Americans thought it, the Europeans thought it, the Arab world thought it, and it can't. It blows up in your face if you don't deal with it. This we've seen also the last 10 days.
Yeah, I fully agree. So then I will turn back to the two ambassadors. And I really hope now we have heard your points of view. Now we have to look forward and see how we can contribute to a ceasefire and to lasting peaceful settlement in the future. And from that perspective, I will ask Madam Ambassador from Palestine, because you were talking about aggression and humanitarian crisis and killings and so on. But do you see a real alternative to a continuously violent conflict? Can you, on the Palestinian side, also coordinate between Hamas and Fatah and the other organizations and reach out a hand and come to the table talking with the Israelis? Please, Ambassador.
Thank you, Mr. Bandevik. Yes, there is a chance, and we had the chances before. If we can look back to history, before, Hamas became strong in 2006 and won the election, but being boycotted and sanctioned. But before that, as Mr. Rabbi said, that it's not 73 years of occupation, it's for 54 years of occupation. That's true. But in 54 years, before Hamas being formed, what we approached? Nothing. If His Excellency can give me one single tiny example about what Israel did to show us and convince us and in specific to convince me that they want peace and dialogue person to person. If they don't stop confiscating the land, aggressions towards Palestinians, blocking our cities, and building more settlements, expanding the old settlements. So how can we believe that they want peace? And regarding Fatah and Hamas, this is an internal issue, and you can see that we can be united if we can deliver something. But since Oslo 93-95 until now, we couldn't deliver a single positive step forward to our people. We couldn't show them that the leadership is making peace and getting something back. So
Yes.
how can we approach this peace process if the will is not there in Israel?
Thank you, Ambassador. But I'm still thinking about, we have to look into future now, because there are two different narratives about the history. And we know that, but now the challenge is to find a platform to looking forward, to have a peaceful alternative to the violent conflict, because that is a damage for both people, and especially the innocent civilians and children. So then I will turn over to the Israeli ambassador again, and you talked about Hamas and how they are behaving and not caring about children and so on. That is your narrative. We understand that, but let us look into the future. So how can we find a solution? That's the question to you. If not Hamas in one or another way is included in the solution, because we know that they have rather strong support, especially in Gaza. And that's a fact. That's a reality, like it or not. And so how can you foresee a solution of negotiations without including them in one or another way?
Thank you, Prime Minister. I cannot speak for the Palestinians. What the Palestinians are deciding between PLO and Hamas is their own thing. But permit me to relate, in continuation to your questions, to the future, but to look in the past. Israel already showed time and again in the last 50 years, 40 years, that it is very serious whenever there is a serious interlocutor from the other side and a serious peace plan. Rabbi Melchior mentioned the courageous move by President Sadat. I still remember I was a high school student at the time, and we were all amazed. And peace came out of it. Whatever name we will call this peace, it's peace. I served in Jordan as a diplomat, had many Jordanian interlocutors and friends. There is peace. There is even people-to-people cooperation within this peace. So I'm a great believer on the ability, once you have a serious interlocutor from the other side, once you stop with, as you called it, the blaming game, once you have a real desire that unfortunately in Gaza we don't see today, but I do hope that one day we will see there as well. Once we have a desire in the other side, as the desire in Israel, we showed with many peace initiatives and agreements with the Arab world and Arab states that it is possible. None of the long list that I've mentioned before of problematics cannot stop us once we have desire to reach an agreement. It was shown with so many countries, it can be shown in the future. I still remember the year 2000, Camp David. President Clinton is putting on the table a plan. I'm not saying this plan is the plan that should be put now or viable or not. This is for the decision makers to take decisions in both sides. But there was a plan on the table. Both sides were presented. The Israeli side said yes, with lots of aches. It was not easy to agree to everything that was embedded there. But we said yes because we wanted to give peace a chance. And you can read in newspapers today, there was the other side who said bluntly no. So I do believe that once there is real desire to reach peace, it is possible. One, there is a possibility to leave the blame game aside. And I have lots of answers to answer the Jerusalem questions, the Bethlehem questions. I'm not going to put them on the table now. I'll just finish with one phrase saying Israel showed already in the past we are willing to go very far in dialogue, the title of this meeting. And once there is this kind of desire in the other side, I'm quite sure we can go very far away.
Thank you, Ambassador. When you mentioned Clinton in 2000, I remind that he came to Oslo a few weeks after he stepped down as president. And he came to my office and we were sitting together, only the two of us, talking about the negotiations on Camp David between Arafat and Ehud Barak. And Clinton, I was so impressed by him because he knew many details about the situation. He knew about the streets and in Jerusalem and so on. And he ended up by saying something very interesting that is just for your thoughts. He said, there will never be a solution on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict without a solution on Jerusalem. And there will never be a solution on Jerusalem without a solution on the holy sites. So that was his summary. And he was so frustrated that they didn't achieve a solution. They were very close to it on Camp David in 2000. So then I will soon end up. We are running out of time. One question to each of the two other speakers. Mitzi Rahib, you talked very much about colonialism, and you said any dialogue without realizing this will fail. But you heard our friend now, Michael Melchior, and his acknowledgement of the real situation and also of the occupation. And you have many voices of like him in Israel. So do you see any hope for a dialogue? I must ask you to be very brief now, and we will come back to Prime Minister Gilani.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, so far, I really haven't heard anything about the root cause that they want really to tackle this. It's very easy and very nice to say nice words, but if you live like me in Bethlehem, surrounded by walls, all your land is taken away for Israeli use and not for your own use. If you live in Gaza like our students there, who were born in a situation were never able to leave Gaza, how can you tell them about the future? Do we have hope? Yes. But for me, hope is not what we see, because I don't see right now actually any in Israel, any right government who wants to tackle this issue of settler colonialism. For me, hope is what maybe Martin Luther, and you are a Lutheran pastor, Your Excellency, as well, once said, even if I knew that the world is coming to an end tomorrow, he said, I will go out today into the garden and plant an olive tree. He spoke about the apple tree. We spoke about olive trees. So we really need to work as religious people, as politicians, to change the systemic oppression. Then peace is, because we don't have any problem with the Jewish people. At the end of the day, we need to share the land. The question is how to share it, not as colonizer and colonized.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I do agree we should go out and plant the olive plants today and tomorrow, and in this way work for peace. So Prime Minister Gilani from Pakistan.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister.
It was interesting to hear your contribution, and I will put the final question to you before we have to end. And that is, how can a country like Pakistan contribute to dialogue and peace in the Middle East, in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. it's a great contribution from your side that Amit Sheikh has organized this webinar, and I have worked with you, and I know your capabilities. You are a neutral person, and amongst the senior elements, and you can also play an extremely important role in this conflict because I personally feel that we have to go to the root cause and the core issues. And as a Pakistani, I can tell you as a root cause for Pakistan, India is Kashmir. And I had been meeting Dr. Manmohan Singh as the Prime Minister, and we had agreed, and we have agreed to sit on a table and to resolve all core issues between India and Pakistan, like Sir Creek, Siachen, and Kashmir. So he used to tell me that he is the man of peace. He had really, we had a good working relationship, but at the same time, I have mentioned in my own suggestions that strong political will is needed from the Israeli leadership. So this leadership can de-escalate violence and pursue dialogue is of a paramount importance. And number two is international community must reiterate its commitment towards two-state solution because the only problem is that they need a separate, they need a state. And as has been rightly mentioned by Reverend Dr. Martin Rahab, that the settlers became the masters and the natives declared terrorists. And therefore, in Australia, even the original Aborigines, they were also taken over by others. I think we should give the space to the Palestinians. So we should resolve their issue of independent state. And if we fail to do that, our position will be just like India and Pakistan without resolving the issue of Kashmir, and there will be the without resolving the issue of Palestine. I think you can also take a major role, and you can work on both sides, and you can play an important role. I know your capacity, I know your talent, and you're a friend of ours, and I think you can play a role.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Gilani, I know that we have a journalist also attending who wants to put the question to the Israeli ambassador, but I think we must do that more directly now because we have run out of time. We are over time. I'm so sorry for that. And I try to share questions to all participants, and we cannot start again now. So I'm so sorry for that. And but I will ask the organizer, Amir Sheikh, do you want a final word from your side before I come back and sum up? Please, Amir. Please, Amir. Are you muted?
Yes, I'm here. I would like to thank all the participants, and especially I want to thank you, Prime Minister Bonavik, and all the audience who are following this through the Facebook. And let's us hope that peace can be created in between Israel and Palestine, and we will not giving this up, and we will try our best level to create peace between these two wonderful countries. So I will give the floor to you, Bonavik. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and I also want to add my voice to thank all participants for your interventions, for your answers to my questions, and we have really acknowledge that there are different narratives with regard to this long-lasting conflict. But as Ami said, we should not give up. The main challenge now, the hours and days ahead, is to stop the bloodshed, to stop the humanitarian suffering in the region. And after that, I hope there will be taken new initiatives for talks and hopefully further negotiations between the parties for a peaceful settlement. And we have got some indications during our conversation today how that could take place. So let us all work and pray for peace for both the Palestinians and the Israelis and other people living in conflict-ridden areas in the world. Many thanks to all of you.